And we're live. Welcome to Useful Idiots Monday morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news show so that you do not have to. Katie Halper is away this week, so joining us to take her place for the day is Briahna Joy Gray, host of the Bad Faith podcast. Welcome, Bri.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. It's always a pleasure.
We really appreciate that you've always been a champion of the show and a good sport in being here for Monday morning and making fun of some of the scummiest people on corporate TV. So thank you for being here.
Best way to spend the Monday morning.
I was just listening to a recent episode of your podcast with you and Glenn Greenwald, and I started it. I was like, do they know it's recording? Like, have I stumbled into a secret conversation where they don't even realize that it's on air? It was great. It was like it was like how a podcast should be, where people don't even know that they're being recorded.
Oh, thank you. I love talking to Glenn. He's one of those people who can be incredibly brilliant and insightful, and then also just like chat it up and be casual and authentic. And it's such a joy to be able to podcast with someone like that. And the comments want us to make it a more regular thing. So we're in discussions.
I would definitely tune into that collab. You both have the gift of gab. Glenn is really, his sense of humor is really underrated, and
for sure.
Yeah, I enjoyed listening to it. All right. Well, listen, something to say at the top of today's show. We're going to be making fun of what's on corporate TV on the Sunday morning news shows. And what's not on corporate TV at all this week, as we're going to see, is the moral issue of our time, the issue of our time, which is the Holocaust in Gaza. There's so much to cover. There's daily massacres, including of children lined up to get water. That was one of the most recent ones. And the way the Israeli government and Western media described it was that it was a technical error, murdering another a group of children. That's just a technical error, and that gets like repeated by Western media. And there's also now another killing of a Palestinian American. His name is, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, Saifullah Kamel Musalat. He is a 20-year-old man from Florida who was visiting his family in the occupied West Bank, and a group of settlers beat him to death along with another Palestinian. And this young man is from Florida. He worked in an ice cream shop with his father, and now his family is grieving him. And are we seeing any coverage of this at all in corporate media? Well, not on the Sunday morning news shows. It was completely ignored, along with so many other atrocities against Palestinians.
Yeah, it's disgusting. Today's Bad Faith episode actually is with Asl Rod. We recorded it at the end of last week, so obviously not implicating anything that happened over the weekend. But I felt compelled to do a sort of summary Gaza episode because so much had happened over the course of the previous week. As you've mentioned, the daily death toll is about as high as it's been throughout this conflict. You had the 972 story about there was the concentration camp story. There's the admission in Haaretz that the IDF is targeting people who are seeking food and shelter, like they've been given instructions to target people. The volume of stories was really quite extraordinary in a way that demanded, in my view, another dedicated Gaza episode, and for that not to have been reflected at all. A concentration, Haaretz is using the terms concentration camp, and our American media can't even bother to cover it for a second. Not to mention, of course, the fact that an American citizen was killed. And what did Biden say when American citizens were killed by our quote unquote enemies abroad? We will have to answer this. This won't go unpunished. And I saw people, of course, surfacing the growing list of Americans that have been killed by Israel. And it's not surprising to be confronted with the indifference of the American press, but it is increasingly demoralizing. And this is part of what I was talking to Dr. Rod about, is what do you do when you no longer feel like the lack of responsiveness from our American political system is due to ignorance on behalf of the public? No, now you're seeing the polls reflect that American sympathies toward Israel are at an all-time low, sympathies toward Palestine at an all-time high. People are more sympathetic to Palestine. People don't want us to be involved. People don't want us to be sending the lethal aid to Israel that enables it to do this genocide. Mm-hmm. And it's a bipartisan feeling at this point, and I'm sure we're going to get into this more in the show, the extent to which America First is causing a lot of issues for a decidedly not American First Trump administration, and yet there's still no political ramifications for them diverging so far from what the average American wants to do. And that, I think, for me at least, raises another level of how sort of psychologically demoralizing the crisis is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what's especially fascinating is what's happening in the Democratic Party, where you have a leadership totally out of sync with the majority of Democratic voters, according to all the polls, especially the younger generation. And they're refusing to budge. They're even refusing to endorse Zoran Mamdani.
Yeah.
And not just because of his views on Palestine. He's also an actual progressive, and they're corporatists. So he's like kryptonite to them. But they are also not budging at all. And again, if only Kamala Harris had just been willing to put forward even a little bit of daylight between her and Joe Biden, maybe things would be different right now.
And to lie. I mean, like, obviously, I don't advise that you lie about it. But what was really galling was the extent to which polling was showing that this was going to be a close race and that the issue of Palestine was paramount.
Yeah.
And that there wasn't even the willingness, like Trump, I'm going to do a ceasefire. It's a temporary ceasefire, and now we're back to the races. You can lie about these things and get voter buy-in, or temporarily position yourself as being marginally better. And even that seemed to be so destructive to the interests of their donors, or whatever. I don't know what the decision making is, or maybe they're so naive or so hubristic that they think that they could get away with it, that they could still win despite what the polls were showing them. It says either something about how ignorant and hubristic the Democratic Party is, or how venal the donor base is, and how willing they are to lose, if it means not even allowing Israel to lose face in the short term.
Mm-hmm. One more point about what's happening in Gaza. I've seen several people make this point now, which is that more Palestinians have been killed lining up to get aid.
Yeah, I saw that.
Than were Israeli civilians killed on October 7th. And again, when you even say Israeli civilians killed on October 7th, you have to add the caveat that not all the Israeli civilians killed on October 7th were killed by Palestinian militants. Some were killed by Israel when it enacted the Hannibal Directive. So it's not even like a fair comparison in terms of like sides killing sides, because all the Palestinian civilians are killed by Israel. Not all the Israeli civilians killed on October 7th were killed by Palestinians. But regardless, more Palestinian civilians have been killed now, just lining up to get water and other aid, than Israeli civilians died on October 7th. Just one of these figures that puts things into perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so with that out of the way, and again, I just don't think we're going to have the opportunity to return to the issue of Gaza in today's show because the corporate media ignored it. So that's why we felt it was important to address it at the top.
Aaron, if this is the last Gaza point, may I just ask you if you saw the this is not from the weekend, but Richie Torres, there was a panel, I think, on Abby Phillips's show on CNN that has something to do with the Zoran stuff as well, because there's been a lot of criticism about how the Democrats have been focused more on dinging Zoran than focusing on the big bad beautiful bill. Richie Torres famously is one of the most pro-Zionist representatives, who spends all his time from one of the poorest districts in America tweeting about Israel instead of tweeting about what's going on in his own district. And despite that fact, there did seem to be a little bit of retrenchment, where perhaps because of the polling that shows that no one has sympathies with Israel anymore, on top of Zoran's win, despite not backing down from Globalize the Intifada and all of that. It was the first time I ever saw him even a little bit on the back foot. And I wondered if you had seen the clip from this interview where he seems to like almost be downplaying his Zionist zealotry, while Ana Navarro and the other conservative they always have on the show, whose name I'm blocking right now, were constantly like trying to pat him on the back and saying, good job, keeping, keep fighting for Israel. And he kept trying to pivot to economic issues and sort of soft compliment Zoran for having good social media strategy and talking about class, almost as though he even realizes that he feels vulnerable in his own district for the very first time.
That is so funny. I did not see that. But maybe if there's more time at the end of the show, maybe we can return to the issue of Zoran Mamdani, because it's to me, one of the few things in the world right now giving me hope,
Yeah.
especially for the future of like Western democracy. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. And in fact, just to throw a curveball, we can talk about this at the end of the show. I'd love to hear your thoughts on voices from the left that are like challenging Zoran Mamdani for different reasons that I think personally are really self-defeating. In
All
this
right, well,
case, I'm all about falling in line behind Zoran.
all
I
right.
am.
I
Yeah.
take well, I don't know if it means I'm to your left on this, but I take a different position on that than you, and I'm
Well,
happy to scrap it up a little bit.
let's put a button. Yes, we'll put a hold on that. We'll talk about it at the end of the show because
Perfect.
for now we have to get to Meet the Depressed.
Good Sunday morning. President Trump sent the global economy into uncertainty again this week with threats to further escalate his trade war. Telling me in a wide-ranging phone interview he plans to impose blanket 15 to 20% tariffs on nearly all U.S. trading partners. After we spoke, announcing 35% tariffs on Canada and 30% tariffs on both Mexico and the European Union, some of the largest trading partners to the United States.
We've been taken advantage of for many, many years by countries, both friend and foe. And frankly, the friends have been worse than the foes in many cases.
He makes these promises left and right. He doesn't care whether he executes them or not, but the American people do. So remember, 90 deals in 90 days. Well, by my count, he's about 88 trade deals short.
And on a
Can I just make a point? Obviously, I loathe Chuck Schumer politically, everything he stands for. But even if I didn't feel that way about him, like, I just don't think someone with that his whole thing, his aesthetic, his voice, it should be the leader of the Democratic Party right now. I think they got to come up with somebody else. Even if he had great politics, I probably would be advocating for somebody else because I just don't think Chuck Schumer with his whole vibe is going to reach people.
Say more about his aesthetic. What would you change about his aesthetic, Aaron?
Well, just like he's just this like his whole vibe, it's just very like I know better than you. It's like with his glasses pushed down. It's just not very. It doesn't really exude vibrancy. Okay, that's the way of putting it.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, especially after the experience with Joe Biden and cognitive decline, and we can see the same thing now with Trump. Why can't Democrats just come to the idea that like let's get someone in younger who's a bit more connected to like the voting base to be the voice of the party, not Charles.
Well, they're trying,
Schumer.
right? With the Elise Slotkin excitement that's been bubbling around.
The former CIA agent. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. That's just my branding advice for Democrats right now. Just let's move away from Chuck Schumer.
Immigration, the Trump administration continues to ramp up its deportation enforcement with ICE raids across Southern California. A judge ruling that immigration officers there can't solely stop and detain someone based on their race or what language they're speaking, among other factors. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem sharply critical of the judge who made the decision.
It's so crazy. We have to have even a judge affirm that you can't detain someone based on their ethnicity or language. Like, that should be obvious, but because of the Trump administration's actions, the judge felt compelled really just to make that clear. Yeah, you actually can't kidnap someone based on what language they're speaking or what ethnicity they are.
Yeah, it is incredible, but not so surprising because there's been this dance. Conservatives have been sort of not all conservatives, but there's been this little slippery dance that's been going on where it started as kind of like it's about American culture, it's about our values, it's not about race. The left is knee-jerk calling me racist, but what I'm really talking about is what it means to be American. And there's been there was more discipline around that at an earlier time in this movement, and the slippage has been happening throughout. And I remember I did a segment once, a radar on Rising, interrogating a monologue that Tucker Carlson had done, where normally he is the most disciplined, but even he in this one like segment he had done had started to blur the lines and kind of criticize an immigration act, the only implication of which was to skew the racial the racial distribution of the country. Not I'm letting in criminals, not I'm letting in low income people, not I'm letting in like the worst of the world or whatever other kind of character assessment you could claim was non-racial. But like the Chinese exclusion, it's like, okay, well, what specific problem do you have with an act that was racial in its exclusion being lifted as opposed to earlier waves of European immigration? And I think there hasn't been sufficient rigor among Democrats pointing out those things which are actually plausibly racist and those things which they just kind of broadly paint with a broad brush. And that has undermined their credibility, so that when these moments come, when the slippages happen, they weren't able to sort of prime the pump for accurately assessing that this is always where we were going to be heading. You know, it started with like, you know, Trump says, Mexico's not sending their best. And to so many conservative ears, that sounded like, well, yeah, they're not sending their best. It doesn't mean all Mexicans are wrong. So it doesn't surprise me, or all Mexicans are bad or rapist or whatever. So it doesn't entirely surprise me that we ended up here. And I don't mean to like blame Democrats for it, but I'm glad to see, I mean, glad is a weird way to put it, but it is at least heartening to see that Republicans have jumped the shark so aggressively, or the Trump administration here has jumped the shark so aggressively, that polls are showing overwhelmingly that folks are not comfortable with this. Trump is losing support on immigration, and all the Democrats that claim that they shouldn't keep talking about immigration because it was a losing issue for Democrats, and that instead they should focus exclusively on the tariff stuff, really have egg on their face, because this is a real cut and dry American issue. You're not allowed to round people up on the streets based on what they look like, and the people get it.
Yeah, I don't recall Trump campaigning on deploying the National Guard into major cities. I don't recall that. And so I think that's
into suburban neighborhoods. I don't know if you saw the footage of like a neighborhood, like a suburban neighborhood with ICE agents, like a dozen ICE agents going through like it's some 1990s like Gulf War raid. It's outrageous, and I think we don't think of America as like that. Like our public consciousness of what it means to be an American and be kind of divorced from the sorts of things that happen on the other side of the world, usually because of us, are really rattled by that kind of imagery. And I think they've really gotten over their skis on this one.
And then the question becomes for me, do those of us on the left, on the far left, whatever you want to call it, do we have to admit sometimes that the libs were right, like about Trump and him being a despot and unleashing fascism? Like in his first term, I certainly made fun of some of that because so much of it was tied up to Russia and this idea that like Vladimir Putin was bringing fascism, authoritarianism to the US via Trump. And I thought that was moronic. But in the second term, the Russia stuff has died down, thankfully. And now we are seeing some fascist things from the Trump administration that certainly he didn't campaign on.
I think there's something to be said about the left not talking about Project 2025 enough. I think there's something to be said for that. That being said, the fact of my understanding was polling wise, I think I listened to Pod Save America and I heard them talking about the fact that like Americans were aware of 2025. Like the liberal media was doing a very good job of raising awareness. It wasn't like an ignorance issue, but because the party was unwilling to offer a perspective like carrot for voters, like they didn't have anything affirmatively drawing them to the polls, understanding that Trump was going to be bad was insufficient. And that's not on the left. The left, if anything, was pushing the Democratic Party to offer something affirmative and not just say Trump is bad, to say you need to, one, pledge to stop the war in Gaza. This is a huge tentpole issue for not just the left anymore, but most thinking, feeling Americans. To do more than offer sort of technocratic around the borderline sort of healthcare solutions, to be willing to say we're going to tax the rich and be against an oligarchy. And the same way that, for whatever you make of their substantive politics, Bernie and AOC have driven a lot of excitement around those kinds of issues. So yes, I think there is an argument that Trump is worse than I think some of us on the left allowed, but Do I think the left would have really engaged differently, knowing what we know now? Not especially, because the but for cause, I think, of people not coming out to vote down 2025 wasn't a failure to recognize how bad it was, but a failure to believe that there was going to be a meaningful departure from the Trump administration on Gaza, or the Biden administration's status quo on Gaza, whether it was Trump or Kamala, and two, the absence of the kind of life-changing material benefits that you saw on offer from like Zoran Mamdani in New York, even at a smaller scale, at a local scale.
Yeah. Yeah. The only one from Kamala I can even remember is that she offered there was something about home ownership credits or something like that. It's like, I can't even, her platform was so opaque and just that I don't like, I know she had some policy issue, like some policy positions that like, and that were better than Trump's domestically. I can't remember what they were.
She didn't run on them.
Yeah,
remember there was that one ad that was really popular that polled well. And then their peer people pulled it. Like there was a lot of terrible advice. The one time she dipped her toe into like a clear-cut economic issue, and now I can't remember what it was. But I remember the story about how well it did and how her people refused to run with it. It was negligent. Right. So again, I'm not trying to like let the left off the hook, but you can't. I don't know. I don't think you and I sitting here saying, yeah, Trump is a fascist any more than the mainstream media was doing it already was going to be dispositive in 2024.
Okay, well, listen, here's what I'll admit to having some egg on my face, and we'll go to our next clip now, because I thought that the Trump administration, I wasn't confident that they would end the war in Ukraine, but certainly I thought there was more of a chance of them doing that than the Democrats, under the Democrats, because given that the Democrats sort of really went all in on the Ukraine proxy war, whereas inside the Republicans there was some hesitation, including from the Trump camp. But since coming to office, Trump has talked about making peace, but he hasn't done it. And now one of the top war hawks in Washington, Lindsey Graham, who's a very close Trump ally, he's saying that he's very excited for the days to come because he's previewing a major escalation from Trump and Ukraine.
The president's rhetoric has changed this week on Russia. He is making clear his patience is very thin. But he's got right now at his fingertips just short of $4 billion in presidential drawdown authority. He doesn't need to ask Congress. He doesn't need to ask the Europeans for that money. He's got it if he wants to tap it. Wouldn't it be a stronger sign if he just sent those weapons or surged them?
Well, the $4 billion is not nearly enough. I
just note that like Margaret Brennan, the anchor there, is so, again, like she's doing the classic thing where the journalist comes up with solutions and proposals for how to expedite weapons transfers to a foreign country. They're just really, really excited about that. Like has done the research. It's another case where like an anchor acts as like a war lobbyist, and Lindsey Graham is happy to play along.
Yeah.
Expect him to exercise that drawdown authority. But the game regarding Putin's invasion of Russia is about to change. I expect in the coming days you will see weapons flowing at a record level to help Ukraine defend themselves. I expect in the coming days that there will be tariffs and sanctions available to President Trump he's never had before. I expect in the coming days more support from Europe regarding their efforts to help Ukraine. Putin made a miscalculation here. For 6 months, President Trump tried to entice Putin to the table. The attacks have gone up, not down. One of the biggest miscalculations Putin has made is to play Trump. And you just watch. In the coming days and weeks, there's going to be a massive effort to get Putin to the table. And to those who are helping him, China buying cheap Russian oil and having no accountability, those days are about over.
All right, great. So Lindsey Graham is saying that he's predicting in the coming days, weapons are going to be flowing to Ukraine at a record level, which, like, I mean, I don't know. It's already at a record level. We've authorized well over $100 billion to fuel this proxy war. People like Lindsey Graham joined by every single Democrat, including the squad. And so now he's promising even more. But that would mean for that to happen, Trump would have to go back to Congress and say, hey, can I get another, whatever, $50 billion, $100 billion to pour into this proxy war? And Trump campaigned on not doing that. So that would be a huge betrayal to his voters. Another one. along with the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing,
Yeah.
if he went and did that. But you can see here, it just in Washington is pathologically resistant to diplomacy, to peace, and the only thing they know is just war. And you're seeing now, if Lindsey Graham is right, that Trump is about to, go all in now. Just how Washington, when it comes to war making, is just it can't help itself. It's like an addict. It just can't stay away.
Look, I hear you saying, and I appreciate the sort of grace that you're offering and saying, well, I have egg in my face because, Trump represented himself as wanting to end the war in Ukraine. But I saw your argument, and I see the argument that the left makes on this a little differently. To me, it's worth exposing the failures of what is ostensibly the resistance party and the Democrats by pointing it out when Republicans even rhetorically get to their left. So when, Donald Trump says, I'm going to end the war in Ukraine and I'm the anti-war president, when Marjorie Taylor Greene says, I want to defund the FBI, it's not that I, as a leftist, am credulous, right? It's not that I'm like, oh, Marjorie Taylor Greene is Fred Hampton, right? But it's to say to the people who should be saying that and meaning it, on the left side of the aisle, the squad members and whatnot, how dare you let her outflank you? You should be embarrassed. I'm going to use their rhetorical commitments, even if they're only rhetorical, to try to bully you into taking the substantive position. When Marjorie Taylor Greene was doing that to fund the FBI stuff, I was like, the squad should put forward a bill that would make the kinds of reforms to the FBI that the left would like to see, or defund it, whatever it is. But take what for her is an effort to sort of maybe protect the certain members of the Trump administration from investigation or culpability for actual crimes, and turn it into the kind of thing that the left would like to see, with transparency and controls and preventing them from going after the left 85% of the time, which is the norm statistically for who the FBI tends to investigate. But they never do that. So no, I don't necessarily feel like that the left has egg on their face, because it's only sort of bad faith liberals who wanted to pretend that an argument that the right is able to outflank the left on some of these issues to the left meant that we actually believe that they were going to follow through on their commitments. Now, I did think it was going to be harder, given that you've drawn these like rhetorical lines in the sand, for Trump to back away from those commitments than it would for someone who never claimed to do anything other than fund Ukraine to the very last soldier is dead, right? To the last Ukrainian. But and maybe there's some benefit to having someone in office who at least is going to have to backpedal it a little bit and, be sensitive about how they untangle themselves from their rhetorical commitments, as opposed to someone who can go full bore. But, you and I both know the nature of the duopoly. And that's why the left, or at least, my corner of the left, isn't committed to the two-party system at all. And I'm a very firm advocate for third parties, precisely because I don't have any faith, frankly, that either party, when in power, is going to do anything other than fuel the war machine.
Fair enough. All great points. Certainly, Democrats gave Trump and the Republicans a huge anti-war rhetorical lane, which they exploited to victory. And it's one of the great political failures that I can recall, just how war crazy Democrats have gotten. There's nothing new, but especially in recent years, like the fact that, again, you couldn't find one progressive to vote against giving tens of billions of taxpayer dollars to the military industrial complex to fuel the war in Ukraine. Like, not one. It's a real letdown. And someone who was really happy about, the prospect of even more taxpayer dollars going to weapons contractors is, again, Lindsey Graham, who now also really wants to make sure that any country that's like even trading with Russia, because we have the right to basically tell any country in the world how they should run their economies, how they should have their trade, that you're next. So here's Lindsey Graham with a threat to China, India, and Brazil.
Graham, I want to ask you on the battlefield and when it comes to weapons, CBS's Jim Laporta has learned a recent defense intelligence assessment shows Ukraine's shortfall in artillery and in drones will lead to marked Russian territorial gains in 2026, with Russia gaining 7-to-1 firepower superiority by this winter. How can you get them what they need if Congress will not approve in the House any new funding? Is it
Even if Congress could approve new funding, you still can't get them what they need, because as the more honest people in Washington have pointed out, including Barack Obama, that no matter what we do, Russia will always outmatch it because they're right there. It's on their border. And they see Ukraine now as existential for them. So no matter what happens, they're always going to double down more. That's why they've taken 20% of Ukrainian territory. And that's why they have the advantage that they have now, because we've been giving Ukraine weapons. But look, still Russia has the advantage in their military and in their weapons production. So how would, even if you could get the money now, how would that make a difference? But that is lost on proxy warriors, because their goal is not Ukraine winning. It's just bogging Russia down in a proxy war that bleeds them, as Lindsey Graham has bragged about. So there's a fundamental disconnect here that is just not acknowledged in the conversation, because this proxy war fever is so strong, even after so many years now of fighting. What I'm saying is, I was hopeful this war would finally wind down, but I don't think that's happening now. And Lindsey Graham certainly doesn't think so either.
what Senator Blumenthal just laid out?
Well, just stay tuned for tomorrow's announcement. The idea of America selling weapons to help Ukraine is very much in play. We've given Ukraine a lot. We've given them money. We've given them military aid. We now have a minerals agreement with Ukraine that's worth trillions of dollars. So I don't want to get ahead of the president, but stay tuned about seized assets. The Europeans want to limit the interest on the assets to go to Ukraine. Secretary Bessent wants to go further. Stay tuned about a plan to go after the seized assets more aggressively. Stay tuned for a plan where America will begin to sell to our European allies tremendous amount of weapons that can benefit Ukraine. Putin has calculated that we would get tired and Europe would get weary. He made a huge mistake. NATO is bigger and stronger, and we're more committed than ever to make sure he does not take Ukraine by force. So Congress is on the verge of passing the most consequential sanction package in the history of the country. It will give President Trump tools he doesn't have today, a literal sledgehammer. And the big offender here is China, India, and Brazil. India buys oil from Russia cheap and resells it. That's despicable. I've talked to President Trump. He said last week it's time to move. He's tried to entice Putin to the table, but my goal is to end this war, and the only way you're going to end this war is to get people who prop up Putin, make them choose between the American economy and helping Putin, and you can only have one negotiator, and that's going to be President Trump, with maximum flexibility to end this war. China.
Okay. All right. So what Lindsey Graham is saying here is the only way to end the Ukraine war is to launch a new economic war on every country that trades with Russia. That's what he's saying. So we're going to impose now secondary sanctions on any country doing business with Russia. Now, of course, does the question ever even reach people's minds that, hey, might people sanction us because we're fueling Israel's mass murder machine in Gaza? No, of course not, because we have the right to support Israel as it slaughters people in a defenseless death camp. But in Washington, it's just conventional wisdom. This is a bipartisan bill that we're going to now launch all these new trade wars with like major economies, India, Brazil, China, because they do business with Russia. Not even arming Russia, but just doing business with it while we're locked into a proxy war with Russia.
Yeah, I've spoken to economists on bad faith about the direct line between the Ukraine war and the sort of political and economic realignment sort of reflected in BRICS, for instance, and how it's hastening the death knell of American economic supremacy. And it's bizarre to watch. It makes me, when I watch clips like this, it's either Lindsey Graham is, ignorant, only cares about the status of America during the remainder of his relatively, short life as a human being. We only have so many years. I don't mean to be wishing him into the grave or anything. But it's either ignorance, indifference, or what? Or you think it's inevitable, and so everyone's just trying to extract what they can out of American hegemony while they can before they retire to their bunkers in New Zealand to await the nuclear holocaust. Like, it just seems so short-sighted to think that you can take on the entire world when the world has basically made the calculation that America is no longer a reliable or consistent partner. And these realignments have to happen. I mean, what is the conference that's happening right now is it in Colombia? A couple of European countries are involved as well, evaluating sanctions in response to the Gaza genocide. I mean, increasingly, the global South and others are so offended by the conduct of the United States and its allies, and also no longer getting the benefit of the bargain from the United States as a trading partner, in part because of how erratic Donald Trump is being, but in part because it's just extractive and coercive, that they are, of course, compelled to make different kinds of choices. And I just don't understand what someone like Lindsey Graham thinks is the end game here. I've also heard the argument that to the extent that the war, the war machine loses interest in Ukraine, it will be because it is just shifting to a different war in a different part of the world, because this is fundamentally just about our defense industry and profit.
Yeah.
Stephen Semler, who's great and people should follow him, did a story recently about how the Pentagon has provided over $770 billion in revenue over the last 5 years alone to just 5 companies: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman. $770 billion. And of course, the big, beautiful bill has the military budget exceeding $1 trillion for the first time. And it's hard not to see this as simply this war and all of these wars as simply maintaining your market for this export.
Well, I think, as Lindsey Graham previewed, we'll be hearing what Trump has in mind, and that includes, I mean, Lindsey Graham talked about this. Okay, fine. Maybe we're not going to fund the weapons, but we're going to get NATO countries too, which, by the way, speaks to what a disaster all this Russia mania has been, not just in terms of the conflict, but also in undermining the social welfare state everywhere. Because if now NATO is redirecting so much more money to fund a proxy war and raising its NATO commitments, like the pledge to spend 5% of GDP on weapons, what's that going to do to already our meager social welfare system? It's going to undercut it further. And that's again, if Democrats cared about social welfare, meeting people's needs, they would be hammering that point instead of actually being, instead of supporting more money on the military-industrial complex. So there's so many ways in which this is a disaster. And now, as Lindsey Graham is previewing, we're not only looking at the prospect of more weapons, but also more trade wars, which will just raise prices for everybody and make people's economies suffer more. So anyway, stay tuned. Lindsey Graham's very excited. I'm very scared. We'll see. Let's move on. We have so many topics to get to. A court in California has just, put down a ruling blocking immigration raids in California based on the ruling that the government is using discriminatory criteria for going after people and nabbing them off the streets, including their physical appearance, what they look like, and how they sound, like their language. So Trump's so-called border czar, Tom Homan, he didn't help the administration's case when he was on Fox News last week, and he said this about the factors that can lead to someone being kidnapped off the street by ICE.
To get your reaction to this Biden-appointed federal judge out in Los Angeles, apparently expected today to issue a temporary restraining order halting your lawful operations. She says, I think it's important for the court not to burden otherwise lawful law enforcement activities. Your reaction there?
Look, people need to understand, ICE officers and Border Patrol, they don't need probable cause to walk up to somebody, briefly detain them, and question them. They just need this totality of the circumstances, right? They just got through the observation, get articulable facts based on the location, the occupation, their physical appearance, their actions. Like, are you?
So he says there that physical appearance is a factor in ICE agents being able to, he says, question someone, but really we're talking about detaining people and setting them off for deportation. That's what he's saying there.
What looking not American, I'm imagining it's like Austin Powers in his like Union Jack outfit.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by physical appearance? Like Jerry Halliwell from Spice Girls?
If you're wearing the Union Jack and you and bell bottoms, yeah, sure, yeah. Okay, well, so that was Tom Homan on Friday, and on Sunday on CNN, he sought to clarify his comments
about that reasonable suspicion and what it actually means on the ground when it comes to ICE detaining people. You said in an interview this week that reasonable suspicion can be based on, quote, the location, their occupation, their physical appearance, their actions. What about an individual's physical appearance would give immigration agents, quote, reasonable suspicion that they might be in the U.S. illegally?
Well, first of all, let me be clear. Physical description can't be the sole factor to give you reasonable suspicion. As I said in an interview, it's articulable facts with an S. So appearance can be just one. For instance, if someone has an MS-13 tattoo on their face, that may be one factor to add to other factors to raise reasonable suspicion. I want to be clear about that again because my words are taken out of context. Physical description cannot be the sole reason to detain and question somebody. That can't be the sole reason to raise reasonable suspicion.
So are we to believe then everyone who's ever been kidnapped by factors including physical appearance has an MS-13 tattoo on their face? And even if that's the criteria, we know that people have been kidnapped and deported based on their tattoos, which are not even MS-13.
Right.
Like there was that hair salon worker,
Yes,
who was kidnapped, sent to El Salvador
yes,
because he had a mom and dad tattoo. So he's still saying that that's okay.
100%. I mean, like, look, even in the sort of domestic policing context that we're more familiar with, yeah, it is the case that cops, if someone commits a crime and there's an actual description of a person fleeing the crime and they're wearing a red sweatshirt and orange loafers, you can go look for someone with a red sweatshirt and orange loafers. But we all know how even that sort of notion of fitting the description is used to round up and harass people who fit the description very broadly, aka is Black, is male, is between the ages of 20 and 60. And we know how those kinds of policies are abused, so much so that Bloomberg stop and frisk was ruled unconstitutional in New York because literally every single Black or Latino man in New York between the years of 2001 and 2012 or whatever it was had been stopped at least once, and on average 5 times, just living their life. It was a surveillance regime. So now we're expected to believe that there's not an instance of someone saying, I have personal firsthand knowledge of the fact that this person is undocumented and they are wearing a Nirvana t-shirt and I saw them on Elm Street at 4 p.m. No, it's just Latino vibes, looks like a farm worker, is seen speaking Spanish, and we all know how this is going to go down. We already know how it's playing out. We don't have to project into the future.
Yeah. Okay, let's turn to Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, under a lot of fire recently, especially in the aftermath of those deadly floods in Texas, but also because she's overseeing what's being described as Alligator Alcatraz, a new gulag, a new prison for undocumented immigrants. And she was questioned about it on Meet the Depressed.
In just a moment, but the New York Times is reporting that thousands of calls from flood victims to FEMA call centers.
Okay, my bad. This is not about Alligator Alcatraz. This is about the issue of the Texas floods. And something that's come up is because of some cuts at DHS, that calls from flood victims were going unanswered. And here she is being asked about that.
Went unanswered in the middle of this ongoing disaster because you didn't renew contracts to keep call center staff in place until nearly 1 week after the floods. Why did it take so long to extend those contracts?
It's just false. Those contracts were in place. Nobody,
it didn't take 5 days?
No employees were off of work. Every one of them was answering calls. So false reporting, fake news, and it's discouraging. It's discouraging that during this time when we have such a loss of life and so many people's lives have turned upside down, that people are playing politics with this.
Okay, two things. You know, I'm not one to defend the New York Times, but the New York Times article, it was based on leaked documents. And I don't think those were forged. So I don't know, someone's wrong here. Either those documents are fake, as she says, or she's being fake in her response. And then she says they're politicizing this tragedy as if that's like some new thing. But this, like a few years ago, I remember there was some devastating flooding in North Carolina. And Republicans, I remember, were like really partisan about that, saying this is a Democratic failure and all of that. So I don't think you can accuse Trump's critics of being the only ones who make partisan politics out of natural disasters.
Yeah, I mean, we're like in this like shamelessness spiral where it does feel like there's no political implications for anything. I do think in instances like this, it's a real opportunity to expose the limitations of a sort of small government, conservative knee-jerk response. Look, the left is not ideologically committed to the size of government, right? Like, we want things to happen. We think that there are instances in which government is more able to deliver on human, bedrock social safety net needs that should not be subjected to markets, like healthcare, for instance. But it's not as though the left, even liberals, are walking around saying, gosh, the government didn't grow enough this year. We got to figure out how to just hire more employees for the sake of hiring employees. If you bring up a legitimate concern about waste, the left is happy to jump on it. Part of the boon of Medicare for all is cutting out the middlemen in these private health insurance industries and recognizing that a policy like Medicaid has one of the lowest volumes of waste among all these other government programs. Like, we're happy to do a real cut that's not just about trying to, on principle, shrink spending in order for it to be used to funnel wealth and affluence away from the people who benefit from public programs to the 1%. But when you're a conservative like this, and you cannot allow that the government ever did anything good, or that cutting the government ever had a negative outcome, or that it might be worthwhile to hire some of the people back that you fired in the wake of a tragedy, you end up looking really stupid. Yeah. And I think I ran into this a lot on Rising with Robbie, where like the libertarian tool chest is just so small. It's just, if in every instance all you can say is that the government should be smaller, you're going to seem insane. And a tragedy like this, I think, is really a difficult moment for the right. And I would like to think that there would be negative political consequences for them in this moment. But I don't know. Historically, I don't know that there's like especially a long memory on these sorts of things.
Well, that's why for libertarians, like I have a rule of thumb, which is that if they're talking about foreign policy, I'm all ears. Okay, sure. like bring it on. Domestic policy, yeah, like nothing's coming in. No, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Yeah, I don't want to hear it. That's my rule for libertarians. Okay, let's move on to Alligator Alcatraz, the aforementioned Alligator Alcatraz, where the Trump administration is imprisoning undocumented immigrants. And here again is Christy Noel.
Lawmakers visited the migrant detention center in Florida, which your administration has dubbed Alligator Alcatraz. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz said that the conditions there are inhumane, more than 30 people stuffed into a jail cell. She said they get their drinking water and they brush their teeth from the same place where they go to the bathroom, Madam Secretary.
Okay, we have to point out Debbie Wasserman Schultz offering a criticism of inhumane conditions in a area holding defenseless people. I mean, even though she's right, it's just completely morally vacuous because she supports Israel's imprisonment of 2 million people in a death camp under even infinitely worse conditions. We just, every time like someone like an Israel apologist talks about civilians being treated inhumanely, we just have to point that out. But that doesn't make criticism here not true, as we'll see from Noam's defense.
What do you say to these lawmakers who argue this is not humane treatment of individuals, of humans?
Well, our detention centers at the federal level are held to a higher standard than most local or state centers and even federal prisons.
Well, if that's true, though, that's horrible because conditions are terrible. So then that doesn't look good on you. That just looks even worse on the jails that are held to a lower standard.
Yeah.
I am pressing play, Wilson. It's not going, though. So maybe we just don't want to hear any more Christian Noam. Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
That's the...
Yeah, the Alligator Alcatraz stuff, I will say, Trump, as horrible as he is, does have a talent, which is branding. The man should have worked in advertising. He should have been allowed to keep his TV shows or what have you, and then we wouldn't be in this situation. But I got to say, I do think he's losing his juice. I think his naming of Zoran Mamdani was the first time I saw him sort of slipping. And this Alligator Alcatraz stuff, it feels like 90s era Ninja Turtle, like the kind of place that Bebop and Rocksteady would have been prison guards at. Like it's so cartoonish that I understand that there's a degree of like feeding the base that of course is excited about this sort of like cruelty is the point style politics. But at a certain point, you have to realize that you're not just performing for a narrow band of folks that come to your rallies like it's a concert tour, but everyone else in America can see this. Alligator Alcatraz, and talking about feeding, was it Kristi Noem who said there's 60 million people more that can go in there, which is like the size, like the number of immigrants in all the country. Like,
wow.
Do you know the comment I'm talking about? Like they're openly joking about the idea of feeding tens of millions of people to animals, and they want to call themselves like the bastion of like Western civilization.
Yeah, well, listen, Chomsky used to describe the Republicans as just not a political party, but a group of radical sadists. And when they talk like that, it's hard to not agree. They seem to relish in the idea of making undocumented immigrants suffer even more. And you saw that with Noam's photo ops, which he went to the Gulag in El Salvador and posed in front of like cages of prisoners, including people who had nothing to do with any sort of alleged gang activity. Were just nabbed off the street. So I mean, it's hard to keep up with all the sadism, but certainly in this case, when it comes to the treatment of undocumented immigrants, they don't make any effort to hide it. They openly advertise it.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. It was 65 million meals. I'm trying to find this quote because it was so. Oh, it was Laura Loomer.
Who's like an unofficial Trump administration official. She doesn't have a formal job, but she's basically in the White House. She's very influential.
Yeah. It's sick stuff.
Yeah.
And the tide is turning, as the polls reflect. The tide is really turning on stuff. I had this pulled up as well. The new Gallup poll from a couple of days ago, only 30% want immigration decreased as compared to 55% last year. So down from a majority to only 30%. 79% of Americans think immigration is good for the country, which is a record high. I mean, like, again, this is the issue that Democrats were running from. They put forward that right-wing immigration bill right before the election as like the big gotcha to conservatives, saying, well, if you really wanted immigration reform, I've given you everything you wanted on a silver platter. And Republicans shot it down because they didn't want to give Democrats a win. But if they had, it would have been a lose-lose for everybody because it was a Republican bill. Like the conventional wisdom among all the big brain box folks who instruct the direction, direct the Democratic Party in these election cycles was that there was no persuasion that could be done on immigration. And all you could do is bend the knee to the Republican view on these things. And lo and behold, they're the ones with egg on their face.
Yeah. By the way, what did Democrats get in return for offering up all these Republican immigration proposals, like an increased crackdown on undocumented immigrants? They were promised Ukraine war funding in return. That was the deal that fell apart. And Chuck Schumer, I remember he said something like, "We gave them border. We gave them border, and where's our Ukraine money?" It's, again, just going back to my distaste for Chuck Schumer.
That's a pretty good impression, Aaron.
Well, I could even do better, but I don't want to be accused of perpetuating some stereotypes, an anti-Semitic stereotype, even though I'm Jewish myself.
When Katie's not here, so I didn't expect to be entertained by comedic impressions.
Well,
but
thank you. Yes, I do my best. Okay. Kevin Hassett, he's the director of the National Economic Council. And he went on ABC News to talk about tariffs and how wonderful he thinks that's going. And John Carl of ABC actually raised a really important question. Why is Trump now threatening new tariffs on Brazil when Brazil has a trade deficit with the U.S.? And watch Kevin Hassett struggle to answer.
Well, as you know, a lot of economists say that the inflation will be coming, and that there were certainly a lot of exports that were be placed. But let me ask you about one new set of tariffs that he announced on Brazil. 50% new tariff on Brazil. Brazil had a $6.8 billion surplus last year. In fact, the U.S. hasn't had a trade deficit with Brazil since 2007. I mean, almost 2 decades. So why are we putting a punishing 50% tariff on Brazil?
Well, bottom line is the president has been very frustrated with negotiations with Brazil and also with the actions of Brazil. In the end, though, we're trying to put America first. I think that a lot of people, when I'm talking to negotiators from other countries, at some point they'll say, "What did we do wrong?" And what I'm trying to get, the message we're all trying to get across is this is about America getting itself ready for the golden age by getting our house in order, by getting our tariff and trade policy and tax policy exactly where it needs to be for a golden age. And normally it's not necessarily about a specific country, but with Brazil it is. Their actions have shocked the president at times, and he's made them clear about that.
But I don't understand how you're saying it's about America, because the president has made it quite clear that what he's upset about is how the Brazilian Supreme Court has handled the criminal case involving former President Bolsonaro.
I'm agreeing with you. What I'm saying is that what I've been saying with most countries was that it's really about us getting the tariffs in order. And I think that this tariff for Brazil is a lot higher because of the president's frustration with Bolsonaro. And the fact that Bolsonaro himself, anyway.
But can you explain to me, because I find it confusing here, on what authority does the president have to impose tariffs on a country because he doesn't like what that country's judicial system is handling a specific case?
Well,
I mean, how?
It's such a good question. The authority is simply that we rule the world. We're the hegemon. We can do whatever we want. So Trump doesn't like that his friend Bolsonaro is being prosecuted right now in Brazil, in a never-ending legal saga there. And so he's imposing just randomly this 50% tariff on Brazil simply because he doesn't like the way they're treating his friend, another strong man, Bolsonaro. And the question, though, that John Carl is asking could be applied not just to Brazil in this one case of the tariffs, but to all of U.S. policy around the world. Because what is U.S. policy in the global economy? It's to sanction the majority of the world's population. Like, a majority of the world's population historically has been under U.S. sanctions because we're trying to destabilize governments we don't like. Venezuela, for example, Cuba, Nicaragua, Iran, Syria. I mean, a major reason why Syria is in such chaos right now, and there was a regime change there, is because we destroyed their economy through sanctions, along with the dirty war. And so the question of under what authority do you have the right to, impose tariffs on someone could apply to so many policies that we implement across the world. And it's good that that Jonathan Carl can see that here, but it could be applied in such a broader way. And notice how this White House official can't answer. It's just, but basically because that's Trump's whim.
Yeah, I've also seen the argument that it's about BRICS and de-dollarization. I wonder what you make of that. That this is also, I mean, I alluded to this earlier, but this is like a last gasp frustration at the sort of economic realignment that's happening, in part because of the increasing kind of recklessness of the sanctions.
I'm not an expert.
War and the isolation of Russia and all of those things. Yeah.
I know that BRICS is trying to figure out a way to avoid like to evade the U.S. control of the global economy, because the fact that like all these countries can't trade with each other because the U.S. controls the SWIFT banking system. And I hope they succeed. I just don't know if they'll actually be able to do it given the power the U.S. has. It's not just the government. Like U.S. corporations own so much of the global economy. I don't know if BRICS will be able to be the threat to U.S. hegemony that people hope it will be. But certainly the U.S. doesn't like any expression of independence. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these tariffs is a response to that too, because any effort to like show independence to be outside of U.S. control will be met with a harsh reaction from Washington, and no matter who's in charge, whether it's Trump or Democrats. Okay, well, we have time for a few more clips. Let's go to this one because, one of the main impacts of this recent spending bill that the Republicans just passed was to throw millions of people off of Medicaid. And here is John Barrasso, a Republican senator, defending why he thinks that's a great thing.
It has become a magnet for waste, for fraud, for abuse, and Medicaid has become a magnet for waste, for fraud, for abuse, and even corruption. And during the votes on this bill, the Democrats said, nope, keep sending Medicaid to illegal immigrants. There are 1.2 million illegal immigrants on Medicaid right now. American people reject that. We have over 5 million people sitting at home who are able to work, who are on Medicaid and choose not to work.
Yeah.
Republicans believe there should be work requirements. Democrats voted nope, not even modest work requirements. If the Democrats were still in charge, everyone's taxes would be going up and we'd be less safe and less secure as a nation.
Senator,
I'm not sure where he gets these figures from. 1.2 million undocumented immigrants on Medicaid. I don't know where that comes from, but I don't see any basis for it. And then he says,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Bree, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, please.
I was just going to agree and say also the sending of the Medicaid, the framing of that, like checks in the mail, where they're receiving Medicaid, like they signed up to get the Medicaid check instead of going to the hospital as a poor person and qualifying for health care for the injury or illness that you have is just wild. And that the media lets them get away with that framing consistently. But go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Well, and then he says 5 million people are receiving Medicaid who don't need it, right? And first of all, like, what is it? So, but does that mean that they're getting medical services that they don't actually need, or that they could be paying for with some job that they could be getting that they don't have because of Medicaid? And even if that 5 million figure were true, which it's not, because it's so perverse to begin with, the whole premise of it. Like many more than 5 million have been will be thrown off Medicaid as a result of these cuts. So even if your 5 million fake figure is true, what about the other millions of people who are losing Medicaid as a result of your bill? It's so cruel, it's so sadistic. And yeah, like the way I think they've structured it, the impacts will not be felt immediately. This will be sort of implemented over time, but it's going to be really, really destructive. And the fact that they can go on TV and defend it, I mean, there was some pushback from Kristen Welker after this, so I don't want to say that there's none, but still, there needs to be way more.
Yeah, as I understand it, the cuts aren't going to come into effect until after midterms. So
there we go.
They're going to be able to dodge accountability for at least in the short term.
Yeah.
Hopefully, though, I mean, I have seen a lot of. I mean, it does seem like on a local level, people are upset about it. The testimonials, people regretting their votes for Trump. I don't know how much of that is like liberal news outlets kind of cherry picking and finding folks to do a victory lap, or if that's a real reflection of outrage. But if Democrats aren't running ads immediately, and especially leading up to midterms, with people that are going to be the victims of this, then again, the negligence is insane because they certainly have the money. These aren't shoestring budgets. And the sort of failure of the party to do a good job landing the plane on how normal people are affected by Donald Trump's excesses has been frustrating to watch. Not just Donald Trump, Republicans from time immemorial cutting these programs. I hope it's different this time. That's all I'll say. I hope it's different this time.
Okay, well, finally, let's turn to the issue that really blew up the MAGA world this week, and that is the Trump administration saying, when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein and the supposed Epstein files, there's nothing to see here. Move on. We're not releasing anything. There's really nothing going on, and that's it. And so much of the MAGA brand was built on Jeffrey Epstein. This idea that like Epstein was part of an elite pedophile ring, blackmailing other elites, and once Trump was elected, the truth would come out. Many of the people that Trump appointed, including his deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, really pushed this theory. And then for Trump to come into office and say, move on. There was, for the first time that I've seen, it's like the MAGA cult, like people actually push back against their dear leader over Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe I'm missing another example, but certainly some of the most forceful shows of outrage against the party leadership that I've seen in the Trump era. And so here is a Bernie advisor. I believe you worked with him on the 2016 campaign.
2020, is it Faz?
Faz, sorry, in 2020.
Uh-huh.
Faz Shakir, pointing out to the Trump people, hey man, like you kind of caused this, and I think he makes a great point.
A lot of people might not remember this, but the White House wound this up. They promised and they pledged this. Dan Bongino, a bunch of others said that they would release the Epstein files, and on February 27th, they brought in, the White House did, to the White House, 15 influencers to say, hey, hold these binders and walk out of the White House with these binders that say the Epstein files, phase 1. And there were two things going on there. One is they thought that they could delude a lot of the right wing, that, hey, we've released the Epstein. And to their credit, a lot of the right wing influencers said, baloney, all you've given us is the stuff that's already publicly available. So they felt used and suckered. They said, where's my phase 2? Where's my phase 3? So I would say to Donald Trump, you wound this up. You caused this. And I think I'm on the side of these right wing influencers who say, hey, if you want to be a paragon of virtue and say you want to take on the powerful, and Epstein, we got a bunch of Jane Does and John Does in those, release them, unredacted.
Kristen, Steve Bannon says that this could cost Republicans the House because the base will be depressed and not show up in the midterms.
Well, that's a really funny prospect that the Epstein files make the MAGA faithful so depressed that they don't even bother showing up in the midterms, and then they lose. And, I think that would be deserved because, look, I'm of the opinion, I agree with Michael Tracy on this, that the Epstein thing was overhyped. If there really was something there, I just don't think both parties will be able to sit on this grand conspiracy for so long. Like,
really?
Given
how many powerful people on both sides of the aisle are implicated?
I think it's a really hard thing to keep under wraps. Now, listen, I could be wrong, and some people who are, who agree with me on some of the other issues don't agree with me on this one. But I just think it's a really hard thing to keep under wraps. And one of the things that Michael Tracy's pointed out, and he likes being contrarian, but I think often he's able to see things in ways that other people miss. Like there's this widely attributed quote from Alex Costa, the prosecutor who went lenient on Jeffrey Epstein, from a Daily Beast article that said that I was told Epstein belongs to intelligence, and I should leave him alone. And so that is the basis for so many people thinking that Epstein's part of some sprawling intelligence operation. Well, Michael Tracy pointed out that when Costa was questioned about this under oath by the Justice Department, he denied ever saying that. And the only source of it is a Daily Beast article from like a third-hand source, which might even be Steve Bannon. So it's just quite possible, and I'm putting this out to people, I don't know for sure, and I could be totally wrong, that all this was a lot of hype aimed to basically mobilize MAGA voters behind this fake cause that wouldn't require any real addressing of actual issues, which is sort of like the classic playbook in politics these days, to get people mobilized around fake issues, the same way that Russiagate got people mobilized behind a conspiracy theory that Trump was a Russian asset. That strikes me as more plausible given just how little actual evidence there has been that I've seen publicly. But certainly, I do love the fact that it's drawing scrutiny on Israel and Israel's control of our politics, because it's forcing people on the right. And I understand why, to speculate that Jeffrey Epstein was working with Mossad, and so I hate to like be a wet blanket when it comes to that angle, because I love the scrutiny it brings to Israel. I just, from what I've seen, I don't think there's much there, and I think a lot of this was just hype from the MAGA crowd.
So there's two levels of the conspiracy, and even if you exclude the bit that says Epstein was Mossad and this is all about Israel, there's still the bit that says he's a child molester who flew the most powerful people in the country to his island, and he's got compromise on all of them molesting children. So it doesn't seem to me that you have to believe the Mossad angle to see the incentive for why there would be a cover up.
Yeah. But also maybe there's a cover up because like he's a scumbag. Trump is a known sexual predator. They were hanging out a lot, and maybe Epstein does have embarrassing stuff about Trump in there, but whether it rises to the level of like an elite pedophile ring.
But isn't that what it is?
Well,
if Epstein, who again became a billionaire out of nowhere after being a teacher at Dalton, a school he wasn't qualified to teach at to begin with. Shout out to Dalton alum Katie Halper. But like, the facts demand some kind of explanation, right? Like the fact of his wealth, the source of his wealth, all of these things demand some kind of explanation. Then the fact of him being found guilty of child molestation, getting the light sentence in whatever that was, 2006, the early aughts, whenever that was, then continuing to have very intimate relationships with all these very powerful people, sitting in the background at Chelsea Clinton's wedding and 1,001 pictures with Donald Trump. I mean, the fact of all of that is insane. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Like, it's
of course
insane.
it's insane. Of course it is. I'm not saying there's nothing to see here. I'm just saying is the maximalist version of the conspiracy just might not be true. That maybe there are, like, in terms of also the idea that there be Epstein files documenting, like, even if the crimes happened, the fact that they'd all be documented in files.
Well,
if that were the case, I think those files would have been destroyed a long time ago. That's also
okay. Files seems, it's just like a thing that people say, the Twitter file, like it's become like just a way to make a drop of information seem like significant. It's just like putting gate on the end of something. I don't know that it really how literal we're supposed to take it. Like Watergate, like it's Ocean Gate, like it's a submarine that blew up. Like, what does that even mean? Gate, So putting that like linguistic aspect of it to the side, you're not curious about the question people are asking is, okay, well, who's the client list? Who he's, convicted for all of this child trafficking. Who is he trafficking it to? We have these little bits of information about Prince Andrew and this and that and the other, but we're supposed to believe that that's sort of the limit of it. Bill, Melinda Gates says she divorced Bill, over over some of the stuff.
Yeah, I just think it's
Allegedly.
I just think it's quite possible that like elites do scummy things, and they're horrible people, and there is more dirt out there on them, and like I'm all for disclosure. I just, in terms of the maximalist version of like this being intelligence and a blackmail ring versus just elite people doing scummy things, I guess I'm more on the camp of this is elite people across the spectrum doing scummy things. And then
what's the difference?
Well, I guess when it gets into the conspiracy realm, like the blackmail realm, and that's where I like.
Right, but you don't need Mossad for the blackmail. I think you're on camera molesting children is enough.
Sure,
especially when you're, a former president or a current president or the richest man in the world.
Well, what I'm saying is scummy just doesn't necessarily mean pedophile. It could just mean people like Bill Gates cheating on his wife, with a grown adult. Like, there are different levels of scumminess here. And but listen, certainly the way all this has been handled, it raises a lot of questions. There is some sort of cover up going on because we're not getting anything. And I'm all for disclosure. I just think, especially in the MAGA camp, the way if you listen to like, Steve Bannon's show or Dan Bongino's show, like this is like they were like the Democrats are covering up this vast pedophile conspiracy and Trump is gonna, like, they hype people up for something that I just don't think was there. And now they're paying the price.
I don't know. I mean, I think Republicans really got to stay away from these binders. First, it was binders full of women that really tanked Romney. Now it's fake binders full of molesters. Like, I don't know. I just think that they should put down the trapper keepers because it's not helping the party.
Well, look, there's been such an uproar that maybe we'll have a new January 6th, like a January 6th to like seize the Epstein files and like liberate the Epstein files from those covering it up. You know, who knows? Who knows? There's that much anger out there. People feel very, very betrayed, understandably, because they were promised a lot. All right. Well, listen, we're going to leave it there. We did find, I believe we found the clip we were talking about earlier of Richie Torres being questioned about, you know, his prospects now that Zoran Mamdani's won in New York, and, you know, is he maybe next for being primary? So let's try to watch a bit of that and see if this is the clip that you were talking before about Briahna. And we've talked a bit about Zoran before we go.
Who is with us at the table tonight. So what do you think?
I'm honored. I think it's fair to say that my colleagues in the New York congressional delegation and we do not care about the Democratic Socialists of America. We're focused on defeating congressional Republicans in the midterms and making Hakeem Jeffries the Speaker of the House and reversing the catastrophic consequences of the Republican reconciliation bill. We could care less about Mickey Mouse primary challenges.
Now, let me ask you this. How the hell does the first openly gay Afro-Puerto Rican congressperson from the Bronx end up being establishment? What does establishment mean these days in the Democratic Party?
Well, for me, the lesson learned from Mamdani's victory is that there is no Democratic establishment.
What do you mean by that?
Are you being honest when you say you don't know why they're targeting you? You know why they're targeting you.
Oh no, I'm not. I know why they're targeting me.
You know why they're targeting
but I don't care that they're targeting.
Well, so why don't you say it? You know why they're targeting you.
I think they're targeting me because I'm pro-Israel.
That's 100%.
Yeah, that's the issue.
So are you saying they're targeting you and all of these other?
Wait, can you pause it for? Yeah. So did you notice, like, so Torres wasn't the one who was going to say it's about Israel. He was going to go with, I don't really care. They're Mickey Mouse challenges. I'm not threatened. Ana Navarro jumps in saying, of course you're not establishment. You're Black and gay and Latino. What is establishment if not just being a white man? And then Jennings is the one that starts egging him on to say, okay, but let's call out what it is. It's the anti-Zionists that are coming after you, and you are being targeted because of your brave, stalwart defense of Israel. And Richie Torres he agrees. But as you watch the clip, you notice that Ana Navarro and Jennings were the ones that keep trying to redirect the conversation to Israel. And for the first time that I've ever seen with Richie Torres, he wants to pivot the conversation back to vertical video and how that's going to be good for Dems, how Zoran Mamdani is good at social media, and how an economics approach is the right way to go. And I can't help but think that that's evidence of him actually being insecure about these alleged Mickey Mouse challenges, given that a Democratic socialist who declined to disavow, globalize the Intifada, just won New York City with the country's largest Jewish population.
Yes. And that's why because people like Richie Torres are understandably shook by Zoran Mamdani's victory, that's why, and this gets to a point I raised earlier, I don't get why Mamdani is facing pushback from some people on the left who, I don't know, like, don't like some of his rhetorical choices, like when he talked about Israel does have a right to exist, but he also said with democratic rights. And I think now maybe they're questioning, or they're raising concern that he's going to move to the center. I don't know. I think it's a really exciting moment. The fact that people like, not just Richie Torres, but like the billionaire Israel supporters who back people like him are so afraid. I think it's a really exciting moment and a real moment of possibility for progressive politics. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple of things. I think it can be true that it's an exciting moment and that we're hopeful about Zoran. I think there are many things about his background, his history of advocacy, his stated political commitments, the way he ran this campaign with integrity, his unwillingness to throw people and ideas under the bus, what we know about his father and his parents and their politics and how he was likely raised, to give us a lot of hope that he is going to do better if he is allowed to be mayor than certain squad members have performed when they were able to be elected to Congress. I'm very hopeful. At the same time, I do think it's naive not to be wary, open, like you can be cautiously optimistic, but to not have your eyes open to the real pressures that are put on progressives as they enter into establishment spaces. And the obligation, I think, of the left should be to hold people accountable, to make sure that they don't err in ways that could undermine their ability to advance the goals that we all share. And I don't think that, discussing or acknowledging potential weak spots is the same thing as being like, screw this guy, I hate him, don't vote for him. Now, to the extent that there are some people who are like full on, screw him, I hate him, don't vote for him, I would disagree with that. But to the extent that there are people who are saying, hey, I want you to do good work, I'm concerned about you hiring the comms guy that used to work for Cuomo, are you sure that's a good hire? I think that's a legitimate criticism. To the extent that you were like, hey, I really appreciate, your many of your rhetorical flourishes, and I can accept that you can't say defund the police, but I appreciate that you've been able to do this interesting sidestep where you basically describe the defund movement without using the term, and you're getting away with it. Like, good job. But I do worry that when you say you're going to work with billionaires, either you're just lying to get elected, which maybe is okay, or you really honestly believe that you're not going to have to take an adversarial approach to them if you actually want to advance the economic agenda that you say is your priority. And that ultimately you're not going to be able to pacify this crew by being nice, because they don't oppose you because you're not nice. They oppose you because you have a fundamental conflict in your economic interests and goals. And I would hope that we could reflect on Bernie Sanders 2016 versus 2020 even, and see that there was some value, electoral value, in him having the power, like in him being very sort of aggressive with Hillary Clinton in a way that he wasn't with Joe Biden, and that willingness to call her out, I would say advanced his electoral project, right?
Yeah.
And to me, Zoran, if he is able to do what he wants to do, it's going to be because he maintains his 50,000 and maintains and grows his 50,000 volunteers, and is able to put pressure on the establishment, not because he says, I'm happy to work with billionaires. And so if we're talking about someone like Shama Sawant, who has like tried to focus in on what might be evidence of a failed strategy and a desire to correct the strategy to set him up for success, I don't think that's a bad thing, because someone like Shama isn't saying I'm rooting against him. To the contrary, she's like, I'm rooting for you, and I would like to highlight what might be some pitfalls before they end up tripping you up.
Yeah.
In actuality.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah. As long as it's constructive, and as long as it's, look, as long as there's a recognition, I think there needs to be a recognition that politicians, it's the dirtiest game in town. I do think sometimes some compromises have to be, or at least some expectations have to be lowered, because it just it's such a dirty game, and it's not one that we're playing, because I could never put myself in that position where I'd have to be so transactional and make compromises. But I do think if you're going to be in that game, sometimes some compromises are necessary, and I'm not going to hold him to the standard that I would like a journalist, for example, because I just think it's such, like, the bar is so low. But
there's also the counterfactual that says, look at Donald Trump. He made no compromises at any time, went up against his own party, won anyway, and has managed to get into the White House twice without bending the knee to anyone or anything.
Right, but he also lies all the time. So if that applies to him, then that means Zoran can.
Okay, but Donald Trump. The reason people like Donald Trump is because even when he's saying things that are obviously untrue, it feels like his truth. Like when you're saying the thing that is politically inexpedient, it feels like, wow, it feels brave that you're saying it, even if it's not true. Do you know what I mean? And that's always been his charm. So look, there's a part of me, and I've been very open about this on the podcast. I had Shama on, I had David Sirota on, I've had different sides of this on to talk it through, because I don't know how I feel. There's a part of me that Zoran's win has made me wonder about my own choice to take a certain kind of adversarial approach in politics. But there's another part of me that wonders if there is a limit to the nice guy game. So obviously we're in different roles, and he needs to win an election and not open himself up for more criticism, or the kind of criticism that might land with the public, as opposed to this, like, you're evil for thinking Palestinians are human beings of criticism that doesn't land with the public. But there's another part of me that's like, is there going to be a limit to how much the sort of perma-smile, like, weaponized optimism is going to take him? Because at a certain point, he's going to have to reveal the contradictions. He's going to have to name the enemy. And it's not going to be when the billionaires, first of all, it's not done. He's not won the election yet. And we know from Bernie world that the establishment will go through any length to stop it.
Sure.
So I do want, and we saw what happened with India Walton, who I also recently had on my show, who won as a Democratic Socialist the mayoral election in Buffalo in 2021. We thought it was a done deal. And through a write-in campaign, the incumbent wasn't even on the ballot. Sued to get on the ballot, was denied by the courts, and through a write-in campaign managed to oust her in the general election. Now, the scenarios are very different here. The numbers of voters, the excitement, a lot of things. But one of the things that India Walton came on my show and said is that she regrets having modulated away from the democratic socialism of it all when that became the focus of the attacks on her following winning the primary. And obviously, I'm not saying that Zoran is modulating away from that. To the contrary, I was very pleased to see him at that DSA recruitment thing over the weekend in New York, doing what Bernie didn't do, which is to maintain his base, knowing seemingly that his power is in the base of volunteers that he has, not in like positive media coverage or being liked by the right people. But like, that is just a warning. Like, that's just it's a little bit of a warning to say, I think there's a lot of value in trusting your base, not modulating too far away from your opinions. And so many of us have confidence in him precisely because he didn't throw globalized intifada under the bus. And all of the big brains would normally tell you that was a mistake.
Yes, exactly. Like that was incredibly brave of him and principled, just to not throw a term that like triggers Israel supporters, to not throw that on the bus. And I think that speaks to a certain integrity that's been lacking in
I agree.
most of our politicians, which is why I'm personally very excited, and I urge everyone to fall in line. Okay, well, we're gonna leave it there. Brie, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and filling in for Katie. It's great to have you. Where can people find you?
You can find me at Bad Faith Podcast. I strongly recommend folks go and listen to the Glenn Greenwald interview. It was one of my all-time favorites. You can find it at Bad Faith YouTube. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Algorithm be kicking my tuckus. And also you can listen to it wherever you get your podcast. You can get an additional episode of Bad Faith Podcast every Monday at patreon.com/Bad Faith Podcast. Today's episode is with Dr. Asel Rod. You probably know her from the internet. Does some of the best Palestine coverage. And we go through the Richie Torres clip at length. We also get into the whole ContraPoints controversy from the end of last week. It was unfolding as we were recording, and I couldn't help myself. Her kind of taking this middle ground position on Gaza that was very disappointing to lots of us who have loved her and followed her on the left. So I recommend you go over to patreon.com/Bad Faith Podcast and subscribe, watch, and listen. And a free extended clip of the premium episodes are also available at Bad Faith YouTube if you just want a taste before committing.
All right. Well, that's our show. Our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Go there to support our show and get bonus content. Thanks so much for watching Monday Morning. Thank you again to Briahna Joy Gray of the Bad Faith Podcast. We'll see you next time.